All right, guys, welcome back. On this video, we are going to upgrade the Chevy 10-bolt to the 12-bolt, and we're going to get rid of the C-clip, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the jack stands from the axle, and we're going to put them on the body of the car, and then lower the axle. Then we're going to remove the nuts from the shock absorber, so that way we can lower the rear end. You'll also have to remove your rear rubber brake hose, and I recommend replacing it since you're already here. Next, we're going to remove the 2 bolts for the lower control arms. And on these, since they're pretty rusted, we're going to spray them with some kind of penetrating oil. And you always want to break loose the nut area, not the bolt head area. And we're also going to remove the upper bolts for the upper control arms. All right, so let's get started. We're going to jack up the axle at the pumpkin area, and then we're going to move the jack stands to the frame of the car. So now we pulled the wheels off, and we cut off the brake lines for the parking brake because we're not going to reuse them. And now we're going to take off the nuts for the shock absorbers. So we've been letting the penetrating oil sit for about 30 minutes, but even with that, you might have to use a hammer to knock them out. If you guys don't have an impact gun already, I highly recommend the 3H drive electric impact from Milwaukee. It's real strong, and it'll make your life a lot easier. So after we remove the 2 nuts for the shocks, we're going to work on the upper bolts. And if you're going to use the impact, you want to use the impact on the nut side of the bolt. Also, if you have any issues with like severe rust and the penetrating oil is not good enough, you could also heat them up with a torch, and that has worked well for me in the past. So now that we got the nut off, we have a little bit of rust in there, so we're going to top it out with a hammer. If for some reason you can't get it out with a hammer, you could also use a hammer and a punch, or a hammer and a 1/4 inch drive extension, or a hammer and a screwdriver to punch the bolt all the way through. So now we're going to move on to the lower control arms. If you have a drive shaft, you want to unhook it before you do any of the bolts for the upper and lower control arms. And once we unhook these lower control arms, then the whole rear end is going to be loose, and the only thing holding it up is going to be the jack. So we just got our replacement. It's a 12-bolt with 373 gears, Detroit Locker, and a 1350 Yoke. But before we install this, we have to remove all the old upper and lower control arms. So if these arms have never been replaced, there's a good chance that the bolts are rusted, so you want to use penetrating oil. And also be aware when you break them loose, these could slide down and hit you in the face or the head or something else. So just be aware of that. After we remove the upper and lower control arms, we are going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the shocks up. These should be 1/2 inch bolt. You're going to want to use a 1/2 inch ratchet on top, and then an impact gun if you have one on the bottom to take these bolts off. So now that we have all the old stuff out, we're going to replace everything with these UMI upper and lower control arms, and they also come with new hardware, so we should be set. So you want your nipple on this, you want it plain down so that way you can grease it, and then you want this part like that so it goes on top of the rear diff. Yep. We're gonna add some of this grease that came with the UMI upper and lower control arms to the polyurethane bushings, and that'll help it so it doesn't squeak, and so that way you can actually maneuver them a little bit easier.
In your life.
This kit came with all new hardware, so once we install it, we're going to put the bolt with the washer through it, and then on the other side, we're going to add another washer and the nut, and the nylon section of the nut should be facing out. So now we're going to attach the upper control arms to the frame, but we want to let them hang there, so we're going to leave the nuts a little bit loose, so that way we don't have issues moving them around when we try to get the differential up in there. All right, so on these lower control arms, you want the nipples to point down. And then you see it where it has 2 bolt holes, one right there and one behind his hand, right there. So these are gonna be for the sway bar. So you're gonna want to point these to the back. So you can flip it around like that. And then it's up to you if you want to have the sticker pointing out. If you do, we're gonna put it on the passenger side. If you want it to point in, we'll put it on the driver's side. So same thing with the lower control arms. You're gonna leave them loose before you install them. Make sure you put some of that grease on the polyurethane bushing before you slide them in. And you want the zert fitting pointing down so that way it's easier to grease once you get some miles on these bushings. So once we install both the left side and the right side upper control arms, we can bring in the rear end so we get bolted up. She's tight, bro. She's tight.
It's actually not.
Yeah, pound that shit in, bro. She's too tight.
It's like you hug up on something.
All right, so next we're going to put the 12-bolt on the floor jack and use that to hold the weight. And then we're going to guide it in so it doesn't tip over. Make sure the bushes are facing up and the rear cover is facing out. This way you don't get halfway in there and then you have to, you figure out you got to flip it over or something. So once we get in position, we're going to try to bolt up the upper control arms first.
May I get the bolts? She's filming. I think I got one. Y'all the same size, right?
Yeah, just make sure you have the washer on one side.
Grabbing the same thing. Or you want? Yeah, I remember.
I know we're gonna do one first. Relax. He's doing his side first. Let me know if I can go up or down. Look to the back, dig a little bit. Pick up the front end, Diego. Yeah, Diego. There you go.
I'm gonna.
There you go.
You gotta do.
More. Go higher. Push your arm up. There you go. You're almost there. Over there. There you go.
I can see on the side.
There you go up.
Am I close, Diego?
Yeah, very close. You need to like pull out a little, or Dad, you need to pull it out a little bit, just a little bit. Right there.
On the arm, Diego, you can push to the back to pivot it. To thing like this. You pivot
It's a little high, so you need to point it down a little bit. Point it towards.
Right
There you go.
All right, now do your side, Diego.
Nice.
That top part you can spin it too, Diego.
This part.
Yes, you can spin it the other way. Take that nut off. The nut up there, Diego. Loosen it up.
This.
No, the nut right there. Loosen that up. The other way. So spin the black thing to the left.
Yes, just a break.
No, the other way. Spin it this way. Look. This way. Yes. There you go. Now the nut. Not stop. Now the nut. Okay, the nut on top of the nut above that. Loosen that one up. There you go. Yeah. Now that'll let you twist more. See that? See, put it. But yeah, you need to go in.
I feel like one of those weird people recording someone like hanging on a cliff who needs help.
Perfect. Right there. Push it. All right,
Cool. Now we gotta get that control arm. And we gotta do this here on both sides.
So I'll give you the lube right now.
A little bit. Sorry, open.
On the sides, right?
Yeah, just create like a little bit of circle around it. There you go. And then rub it with your finger. All that. Like this.
Is it good enough for you?
We'll lock it. Oh yeah, you guys are good. Push it. There you go. You're good over here. You were good. Don't zoom in on my fat, babe.
All right, I
You
got
got
ready.
your Diego? Nice.
Yeah.
You're almost there, Danny. You're good.
I know, but I didn't do it.
Ooh, you're almost there. Just jiggle it.
Anytime you use a hammer to tap these bolts in, be careful that you don't damage the threads.
I got the spring. The spring. Put it here.
So now that we have the upper and lower control arms attached to the rear diff, we're gonna install the rear springs on. And if you need to, you can lower the rear end a little bit, install the rear springs, and then lift it up into place. And then once you have them installed, you can install your shocks, and that will keep the springs from coming out, and it will keep the rear end from lowering anymore. So you mount the spring to the perch on the rear end, and you slide the spring into the pocket of the frame of the car. So next, we're going to install the shocks. We're going to install the upper bolts first. Now, these didn't come with hardware for the top, so we ended up using 5/16 by 18 bolts that were 1 inch long with a matching flange nut. You'll definitely want someone to help you hold the shock up while you put the nut and the bolt in on the top. You're going to use a 1/2 inch wrench to hold the top part up, and then you can either use an impact if you got it for the bottom bolt, or you can just use a ratchet and socket, 1/2 inch socket. So next we're going to attach the bottom of the shock into the bottom of the rear end. And this one actually did come with nuts and washers, so we're going to slide it in the bottom. We're going to use the washer next, and then we're going to put the nut on last, and you're going to use a 3/4 inch socket to tighten it up. So once we have the shocks installed, we could tighten up the hardware for the shocks, both the upper 2 bolts and nuts, and we could do the bottom nut. Everything else, like the upper control arms and the lower control arms, we're going to tighten those up, or we're going to leave them a little bit loose until we're able to load the suspension, and then we're going to tighten it up. All right, guys, so we got the lowering springs in, we got the adjustable upper, and we got the fixed lower control arms in. We got the new 12-bolt rear end in. So next thing we're going to do after this video, we're going to adjust the pinion angle and set that up. And then we're going to do the front springs and probably the brakes and some other stuff. Stay tuned, guys.